we're all together here to do the Grateful Graffiti project. And I had done it previously and realized my camera wasn't aimed to the right place. I was painting and no one was able to see it. So usually I leave bloopers in, but that one was just a little beyond acceptable blooper. Anyway, you want to lay paper down or wherever. If you're working on an easel, make sure you have a good covering on your floor. And if you're working on a table like I've got, make sure you've got some paper because this will be a little bit messy. I'm going to fold my paper up a bit to make it easier on this side for me. Okay, now if you've seen the material list, you've probably seen that I mentioned a wide brush and various reds and oranges and yellows and all that for the bricks. So that's the first step. And you can use an 8x8 or an 8x10 or something like that. I wouldn't go too large, especially if you're trying to put it under a camera. But the reason I say that is because when you do the lines and all the details, if you have a real large project, you may get a little bit frustrated by the time it's done. The glazing medium is optional. If you're going to do this and you want a little smoother result, or perhaps something you want to show somewhere, you may want it to be a little less brush lines, and that'll help you with that. For this, I probably won't use it because after I get all the graffiti on and stuff, it's not going to look the same anyway. So that being said, if you don't have a brush, you can use a sponge. You can use a lot of things to apply paint. The brush is always the best and the most ideal. However, it is not absolutely necessary. Also, if you printed out the traceables, especially the brick one, you'll start with that. And if you want to use my example for graffiti, of course, that's a welcome thing for you to use. There's a couple different ways you can go about this. Actually, probably many ways to go about this. You can transfer the image, even if you draw the image, you can still transfer it onto your canvas ahead of doing the bricks. Or I find it easier to color the brick wall all completely in the brick color and then trace that on. And to trace it on, let me show you a couple different things you can do. You can use tracing paper, and it's a very thin paper, you can see through it. Trace the design or print it on here if your printer does that. My printer will not handle that. It will cause a major mess. So for me to do that, I would have to use a pencil and go to all the trouble of tracing it, and then using the tracing paper to draw on pencil, and then transfer again. Another way to do it is if you have the paint down and it's all the dark reds and yellows and all that, use what they call trace down or transfer paper and lay the image on and draw heavily on there, and it will make marks on your canvas. And this is white transfer paper. I have various colors, gray, black, all that, because whatever you use on your canvas may make it hard for you to see what you traced on there. And an example of how to do it with the tracing paper without getting a piece out. When you do the tracing, you trace this and then go over it with pencil, lay it on there, go over it again, and the pencil gets on there. That's a lot of extra steps, but if that's how you want to do it, there's no reason you don't need to do that. You can draw it by hand, freehand too, or even an optional, you don't even need to make bricks. You could just paint a solid area and put your graffiti on that. And I'm sure there's more options, but in the interest of brevity, let's proceed. I'm going to use a brush, and I was using a palette made out of a paper plate, but really for this project you can apply the paint directly on. And I designed this particular project for acrylic, but I will later on video how to do things like the brick wall with watercolor and various other mediums. The reason I want to do it in acrylic first is because I think it's going to be the easiest to manage for most people, at least starting out. So I'm just going to throw some paint down. This paint I got at Hobby Lobby. I would recommend the student grade for this. I know that expensive paints are recommended often, but the reason I say that is for this way we're going to do it, I'm going to deliberately streak and deliberately have a variation in the way the colors are, just like natural brick is, especially weathered brick. And so I think actually the student grade paint will do a better job for that. And because I don't want to dirty a palette too, I'm not going to do that. Alright, that's probably enough. We can always add a little more. And the good thing about acrylic paint, if it is a little thick, like you put too much on, you can do all kinds of things to remove the excess or just let it dry. Okay, let's make some patchy mixed messes on there. And we want to get fairly decent coverage. However, because there's going to be graffiti painted on here, you may have some variances in thicknesses that aren't going to show regardless. So go wild, do what you want with it. And bricks don't always have to be red. You may choose to do them in purple. You know, there's no right or wrong with this. This is just fun, and it's a way to express your gratitude for various things. Or if you don't even like the gratitude subject, you can do whatever subject you like. You may want to talk about only your pets or something. That's okay. You could talk about grievances even. I mean, it's just whatever you want to do. But the reason I chose gratitude is because sometimes we have days where we just really need to be reminded of the things we have rather than the things we don't have. And I was hoping this project would perhaps give you a little happy feeling of those things that you are grateful for. Now, I would like to put a little more yellow up there. I'm actually getting quite a coverage on this, so I'm going to have to knock it off and call it done for that section. Alright, a little bit of variance. It probably shows up better in real life than it does on the camera, but it's got some gradient there. Okay, we need to let that dry. Being acrylic, and because I did not add the medium to it, we didn't need it actually. It shouldn't take too terribly long, maybe half an hour. I would give it an hour or even longer. And what you want to do is make sure it's fully dry if you're going to do any kind of transfer in the design, or you're going to have a big mess. So, with that being said, I will be back in a few minutes and we'll go with step number 2. Alright, the tracing paper. I wanted to show you how this was done. I had traced this to this. Actually, I made a smaller version of this on the printer and then traced it because I liked it to be a little smaller brick. Anyway, I traced it with ink because it's much easier to see. And then I started on the other side, the pencil lines. And you go around each one. Now the reason I'm showing you this method is because I find that this method is probably the one that shows up the best. The trace down paper, the white at least I was trying to use, it really requires a very hard press onto the surface to get it to show. For some reason this is not very good for trace down. It is usable, but it doesn't make a very good solid line. Anyway, I think this one will give you the best result, even though it's going to be a little bit of extra work. So let me just do a few of these because I don't want it to be a 10-hour video. Hopefully this surface made it easier for you to see what I was doing. And you line it up however you want to line it up. For the sake of the video, I'm going to line it up, you know, reasonably close. And then just go back over your ink lines. Put a little pressure on it. You don't have to get super, super tough with it. And if you do, it may crease the paper, making it very hard to paint. Or not paper. The surface of the painting. Make it very hard to get the next layer of paint to go on the way you want it. Also, a pencil has graphite in it, which can repel paint. However, it doesn't seem to bother the acrylic paint too bad. You have to get pretty thick to make it a problem. Hopefully you can see those. I can go over it a little bit more to make them bolder. The problem is if you get them too bold, like I say, the graphite may repel some paint. Let me show you how you can do that. Now you can build it up a bit. I typically don't like to anyway because then I have to sharpen my pencil more often. And I'm not really a fan of doing that. No particular reason. Okay, let me go back over. I want to line it up again so I don't have multiple stacked bricks on each other. And then go again. And you can maybe see that a little better. In real life, it shows up more perhaps than it does on the camera. But once you get that all copied, and like I say, it does take a little while. And there's a few I did there and all that. Either copy them all or a few of them. This is a guide. Then we'll go the next step and actually paint in those lines, which will be somewhat tedious. It won't be too bad. And that'll be for our Grateful Graffiti. See you in a few minutes. Okay, hopefully you can see, hopefully the shine isn't too bright, the lines for the bricks. Does not have to be perfect, and perfection is in the eye of the beholder. Take something you can use as a palette, and we're going to make gray. Now, if you have gray already in the tube, that's fine. I do, but it's not the gray I want. I want something that's a little lighter, kind of looking like cement. I guess I should call it mortar to be correct, but it looks like cement to me. Anyhow, it's only going to take a very little black to make this a gray. Black is a very strong color. And with the lines between our bricks, we're going to need something fine, such as a round brush in a very small size, or you can use an angle brush and make sure that you have the straight edge as your go-between. I'm going to try a couple different things, see which one works the best. Now let's get that there. Oh, my door's creaking open. The weather's been crazy, so the doors like to pop open. Sounded like my stomach growling, but I know it's not that. Okay, that might be a little darker than I want. Dark colors in acrylic often dry lighter, and light colors often dry darker. So I have to take that into account. Although here, for this particular work, it's not going to need to be super fancy. I guess we'll leave it like that. And then you just pick a spot to start, somewhere where you're not going to put your hand in it, which is usually top to bottom. So let's try. But because I'm filming this, I want to do it where you can see it better. So let me pick a spot and just carefully go between. If you get a little bit over a brick, that's okay. It's not the worst thing, because I went downtown yesterday and looked at some of the brick buildings. The differences in how they do the mortar and the brick. For one thing, the bricks are all different shapes. Some have these little short bricks that are about 4 by 4 or something like that, and use those, which are very cute. Can't imagine all the tedious work a whole bank building in 4 by 4 bricks would be, but that's something they did. But I noticed a couple of the buildings, when they put the mortar on, rather than smoothing it out or even using a little thing to crease them in, they left it hanging like in I don't know, like as if you put pudding between two slices of bread and smooshed them together, and the pudding was coming out the sides. That's what it reminded me of. I couldn't decide if I thought it was ugly or not, because in a way it seemed to work for the building, and yet it would bother me to leave it like that if I was putting the brick on. I don't know, I guess it depends on the person doing it, what they like. The one with the little square bricks, when they did the between touch up, it looked like they took something with an angle and it kind of curves in, like if you looked at it from the side it'd be a V. I thought that was rather interesting. The effect when the light was on it in different places kind of gave it a interesting, I don't know, it actually almost looked sculpture-ish. I don't know if I can describe it. You'd have to see it, I guess. Hopefully you can get an idea by what I'm doing here, how we're doing this. It can go a lot faster if you have all your bricks perfectly lined up. Like some buildings I see, they're pretty straight, but I will say our town's very old, so a lot of the older brick buildings, the bricks are not perfectly level on the building, and the mortar between them is very irregular. I actually find they're very charming looking, and the bricks are all different shades of red and yellow and orange. They probably are from various time periods because our town had a great fire many years ago and they had to rebuild a lot of the buildings, including the brick ones. You wouldn't think that a fire would destroy brick, but it does. Probably because the mortar, I'm going to assume, gets weak when it's overheated. That's my guess. I don't know that for a fact, so don't take that anywhere where you need it to be important. Anyway, hopefully I can finish this and you won't have to watch me do the whole thing. Now, when it comes to areas where the brick is broken, if it's broken on the mortar, I'm going to go ahead and put the mortar in there, because that's going to show through due to the brick being broken. In real life, probably it would be more dark because there might be a hole behind it through the wall, depending on what they put behind it. But where the hole is actually on the brick itself and not where the mortar was, I want to use like a darker color red or lighter, depending on where the light's hitting, to actually look like chipped brick, because you're not going to have mortar in the middle of the brick. So you'll see that better when I get to it and do it. And I don't know if we'll need a second coat. We're going to look at that after I get this all on. Being that we're going to put a lot of graffiti on there, it might be just a waste of time to do a second coat because it'll be covered up anyway. It all depends on what your strategy is for your graffiti. Like I say, make sure you don't get your hand down in it. I do that plenty of times and make a mess. I'd rather not show you to do it that way. Alright. I'm going to turn this off and finish this, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Everything seems to be dry now, so next step. Well, there's a couple different choices here. This looks fairly flat. If you were looking at this brick wall as a painting, you would say, wow, that looks very flat. And, of course, it is. But most paintings, things tend to look a little bit, dimensional. And the reason for that is we don't have a lot of shading going on here. But I'm a little worried about adding too much shading, because with all the graffiti I'm going to be adding, I think it's just going to be a lot of wasted time and wasted work. However, I can show how we can do some of these blemishes in the bricks and a little bit of shading. So if you wanted this to be a nicer brick wall before you add your graffiti, we could do that. And what I'm going to do is take one of the darker reds and don't know, maybe the lighter orange. I don't want to use too much of that. I don't want to waste a lot of paint. But what I need to show you is these brushes have dried. I've let it go long enough that my brushes have dried, because a dry brush technique is what I want to show you first for giving a highlight. And I just want to take the most very little bit of paint. I want to get most of that off of there. Okay, I might even took too much there. And select a brick to highlight. And it's not going to show up a lot, probably. Need just a little more. I don't know if that's going to show up on the film. I may have to go lighter just for the sake of making the point. And I'm going towards the center where I'll probably be covering it up, because I figured that would work better. I'll add a little yellow to that. Maybe that'll... that's the trouble with filming. Sometimes you have to adjust for the way the camera alters the look of things. Okay. That's actually an interesting shade there. Get a little bit more. I don't want pure yellow. That's too much. I don't know. I think that'll work. Now I can't even tell which one I was working on. I'll just grab one here. How about this one? Hopefully you can see that. And when you add a little bit to where you would expect the sun to be hitting it, you can see a little lighter there. Well, now I want to clean that off the brush and show you how to contrast that a little bit by taking the darker red. I still got a little bit of yellow showing in there, but most of it's gone. I would usually wipe off with something a little different, but we're just showing you an example right now. So you blend that in just a little on the edge. You don't want to go too extreme, because then it'll look like a cartoon. Unless you want it to look like a cartoon, obviously. Now, in real life sitting here, that has given it some dimensional. Hopefully, the film has picked that up. We may have to go a little more extreme for that to happen. There. Visually, it's a little bit questionable whether it's too much, but hopefully, for the sake of the film, you can see how that brings the brick out. And if all the bricks were like that, it would look a lot more like a real brick wall. However, because we're adding the graffiti, and I haven't even decided how I really want to do my graffiti completely, most of this will be covered. There's no point in doing every brick just to cover it up. I think it's just going to be a frustration. But I wanted you to know how to do it in case you do want to show more of the wall. You can. Now let me get the traceable. It works the same as we traced the bricks on, of course, but I really wanted to use it more as a guideline to show that graffiti, at least the graffiti I've seen, usually takes letters and numbers and images and kind of stylizes them. The way I did the house here is rather cartoonish, but I see a lot of this on the graffiti. If you want to do something different, absolutely you can. There's a lot of splashes and all that in graffiti I've seen, and it makes it interesting. It gives it personality. I forgot to show you to do blemishes on the brick. And that's really the same thing as the dimensional thing. You just give it a little a little scar there. And you're going to want to know how to do that because that's exactly how we're going to paint the graffiti on. We're going to take little bits of paint and put it in places to mimic a street artist being there and adding their own little touch to the brick wall. There you go. Hopefully you get the idea. Don't want to spend a whole lot of time doing that because I want to get to the fun part. I want to start designing this graffiti. I would recommend chalk, perhaps, for this drawing, but if you don't have chalk, and this is the same kind of chalk as anything else. This is a, I think I call it a tailor's chalk. I think it's in the sewing department at most stores. But if you don't have that, the chalk is not much different than your basic children's chalk or sidewalk chalk or blackboard chalk, except the cut is different, obviously. And from here, if you got an idea of how you want to draw, the good thing about chalk too is it's easy to erase. Let me show you. Let's just say that was a mistake. Go like that, it's gone. Okay. You have to think about when you're putting your graffiti on, you may need to do it in layers. So you want to know what you want behind everything first. And I would say if you're going to do any splatter work, you may want to do that in the back. And one of the things you can do for splatter, if you want to do it like a splotch, you would need the brush or something to do that. But for splatter work, you need a toothbrush or something very similar to that. And get my scissors here. You do not want to use a toothbrush that you would use to brush your teeth. I don't know if it would hurt you or not, but let's just not take a risk on that. And to do splatter, you can just put a little bit of paint on there, and if you're going to do it for a graffiti style, you probably want it facing down, and just push, oops, sorry, push the paint off with your thumb. If you hold it up like this, like some artists do, it's more likely to look like snow, and it will also go everywhere. I don't want it all over my camera, so let's just not do that. I didn't put a lot of colors up here yet. Let me pick out a few. I got even more colors from the dollar store, so hopefully I got a selection. Not the bright green. They got the greatest limeish color green. I gotta open that one. Isn't that beautiful? If you can see it. And I'm going to show you how to do the spatter. Now, a lot of people moisten their brushes first. I tend to not because, especially when I'm using like a student grade paint, it's already pretty wet. You don't want much on there. Not until you're really familiar with what you're doing. To spatter, I'm going to need a little bit more. This is a new brush, so I'm not familiar with how it spatters. See, it's not even spattering. Well, I'm going to leave this blooper in because this could happen to you. Could do this. And unfortunately, I see spatter here, but I doubt if the camera sees it. So there's also another alternative, which it also spattered on my hand. You can take the bristles and apply the spatter that way too. This method, I can see the little spatters, but they are very small. And being that small, I just really don't think you're going to be able to see that on film. I can go big. I can put a lot of paint on there and try to get it to show. It could be a disaster. And again, I see really tiny spatters. Now that would be great if I was doing my snow, but I can see the spatters there. Oh, maybe, I don't know. I don't know if getting it closer would help or not. But anyway, there are ways you can do it. If you have a fan brush, the spatter by this method works a lot better. And I'm just ending up hitting it with the brush. But you can improvise. That's what this is all about, improvise. Now that's if you want spatter look. You can either do it the normal way by flipping it or just hammering it on there. That's a spatter. I should have brought some wet towels in. Now for a big blotch, like some of them that just do this with the brush, you may want to get the bigger brush out again. I love these angle brushes. If you have an angle brush or can get one, you're going to fall in love with it. And now I got to go look for another color. How about pink? These Daler Rounding, or however you say it, from the dollar store, have proved to be pretty good paints. So you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of money to enjoy your painting hobby. In fact, I'm hoping that it's more accessible to everyone that way. Now, if you're just going to do a wild, chaotic, you know, like you see some people do on their paints, you can go like that, or you can do circular motions. I don't recommend the circular motion if you're wanting to look like what people spray paint. Graffiti often is spray paint. You want wispy, splattery, you know, where you can see the paint through there as if someone took a spray can and just went like that. So that's one thing you can do. That also will help. That will also help if you're doing any words. It will show up better if you've got a little background on it. So we're going to take some more of this yellow. Well, actually, I'm not going to push anymore. I'm just going to grab what I got there and add some there, because I'm going to try to do something there that I've not done yet. Let's get a little thicker on there. And I like it. You can still see the bricks between there. Alright, so let's get on with the chalk. I'll have to clean all that before it dries out. And if I'm going to put the word, one thing I'm very grateful for is to have home. So I'm going to stylize some letters for my home word. And the chalk is just a guide. When you put the paint on, you'll probably be doing it with the brush, which might not get perfectly on the lines. Okay, I'm trying to kind of follow the model I made there. And again, it's probably not showing up real well. I'm hoping that it's good enough. I'm going to change it up a little bit. I might still be a little wet, so be careful. Yeah, I'm still some wet. We just clean that off on our paper. Okay, now that you see that, if you want it to stand out, you may have to actually use a little black to line it. And you can do that either first or afterwards, and then let it dry before you add the other color, or if you're adding color first, let the black dry first. And get the red off of the liner. And when you do that, just follow your chalk line. Chalk will just disappear under the paint, or if there's any left over, you can just brush it off with your finger or a rag. Make sure your paint is dry though before you do that. This brush has got a wild hair on it, so that's why it's kind of doing its own thing. But I'm going to leave it on there because maybe that'll add a little character. You don't want your painting to look like everybody else's, right? Okay, hopefully you can see how to do that. We can always touch it up later. And even if you do your graffiti painting and say 3 months down the road you decide you want to do something else with it, you can add more paint, you can paint over what you got, or just make a new one. But if you find more things you're grateful for and want to have a little reminder, you can always add to your painting. It doesn't matter if it overlaps a little bit, because if you put it on there, you're going to know it's there, even if it's hidden behind something else. And that's something else you can do too. You can always hide something you're grateful for that maybe you don't want the whole world to see. Could be anything. You can always put it under the paint. You know it's there, but nobody else needs to know it's there. And you're grateful for things probably that other people maybe are not so much grateful for. I'm a big fan of coffee, if you haven't heard me talk about that before. And there are people who absolutely can't stand coffee, so I'm grateful for coffee, but maybe someone else isn't. So there we go. Now I'm going to have to let that dry before I add color to it. And just for fun, I may add a multitude of colors to that at the end to have a little personality. I'm going to give it some extra lines there. Though it looks a little sloppy. Just going to touch it up however you want to do. Alright. I'm going to do a little more to this. I may spatter, I may do some other stuff. And I'll be back and show you how to fill that in. Talk to you in a few minutes. Okay, I think I'm done with what I'm going to do on my Grateful Graffiti project. And I hope you post some pictures of your Grateful Graffiti project. But if you don't, I hope you have fun with it. I hope you paint along, but if you don't, I hope you enjoyed this session. And always be reminded of what you're grateful for and what you have and would like to hold on to. See you in the next session.